It began with the sound of a teacup breaking. That small, fragile sound that sliced through the quiet of my morning like a whisper of warning. I remember standing in my kitchen, sunlight spilling through lace curtains, watching the steam rise from the kettle, and then the sharp crack. I looked down, and there it was, my favorite cup, shattered in my hand. I didn't remember dropping it. I didn't even remember picking it up. For a moment, I stood frozen. The floor beneath my feet swayed slightly, like a tide pulling memory away from shore. I told myself it was age. That's what everyone says when the mind slips. Even for a second. Age. But I was only 72, still sharp enough to read the newspaper front to back every morning, still baking lemon pies for church Sundays, still remembering the smell of my husband's aftershave long after he was gone. Or so I thought. My neighbor, Claire, came running that morning. She always did. She lived next door for nearly 15 years, ever since her husband left, and she started renting the little brick house beside mine. She was the kind of woman who carried herself like she belonged everywhere she went, confident, warm, and endlessly helpful. Whenever I forgot something, she'd remind me. Whenever my hands trembled, she'd steady them. Whenever loneliness pressed too close, she'd come with a casserole and stories that made me laugh. She was, as everyone in town said, a godsend to old Margaret. But godsends don't always come from heaven. "Did you take your pills this morning?" she asked, sweeping up the broken cup before I could move. Her hands moved too quickly, too surely. "You really should label them better. You've been forgetting lately. Forgetting." The word lingered in the air. I forced a laugh, brushing it off. "Oh, nonsense. I've just been distracted. Too many things on my mind." "Like what?" she teased, and I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came. I couldn't remember, not a single thing I'd done the day before. That night, I sat by the window and watched her porch light flicker through the dark. She was on her phone, pacing, whispering. I could hear fragments through the still night air. She's slipping faster. No, she doesn't suspect anything yet. Yes, I'll get it soon. At the time, I told myself I must have imagined it. The mind does play tricks in the dark, but a chill settled deep in my bones that didn't leave for days. The next morning, Claire arrived with breakfast, as usual. She carried scrambled eggs, toast, and a jar of my own strawberry jam, one I didn't remember giving her. "I thought you might like some company," she said with that honeyed smile. Her eyes moved around my house, quick and curious, like she was cataloging every corner. She lingered by the photo wall. My life was there in frames, the wedding picture from 1968. My late husband smiling in his Navy uniform, my daughter holding her newborn son, my grandkids at the lake house. "You've got such beautiful memories," she murmured, almost to herself. "So many." I smiled politely, but when she turned away, I saw her fingers trace the edge of one photo, a photo I swore had been in the other frame just yesterday. My daughter's face looked faded. Or maybe the light was different. That's when I noticed something strange. There was a gap in the shelf. A small silver locket, that had always hung near the clock gone. I asked her if she'd seen it, and she shook her head quickly, too quickly. After she left, I searched every drawer, every box, every corner. Nothing. The locket was gone, but what frightened me wasn't its loss, it was that I couldn't remember who had given it to me. Was it my husband? My daughter? My sister? The harder I tried, the emptier my mind felt, like pages ripped from a book I'd read 1,000 times. And then the dreams began. They were small at first, disjointed, blurry. I'd wake up seeing Claire standing at my bedside, smiling, whispering words I couldn't quite hear. Then one night I woke with my heart pounding and the taste of metal in my mouth. The moonlight spilled across the floor, and there she was, just outside my bedroom window, her face pale and still, watching me. I called out her name, but she didn't move. She just smiled, slowly, like she knew something I didn't. Then she turned and vanished into the dark. The next morning she came over like nothing happened. "You're looking pale," she said sweetly. "Bad dreams again?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind felt foggy, heavy. I found a strange smell in the kitchen later that day, a faint scent of burnt plastic near my coffee pot. When I looked closer, I saw a tiny device tucked behind it, blinking faintly. A small recorder. I froze. I picked it up, my hands shaking. I didn't know much about gadgets, but I knew it didn't belong to me. And the only person who'd been near that counter lately was Claire. That night, I confronted her. She laughed. "Oh, Margaret, you're being silly. You probably bought it yourself. Maybe you're just forgetting." The way she said "forgetting" made my blood run cold. I wanted to believe her. God help me, I did. She'd been there for me for years, mowing my lawn, picking up my groceries, driving me to the doctor. She was the only one who visited after my daughter moved abroad. If I didn't have Claire, who did I have? So I said nothing. I tucked the recorder in a drawer and tried to forget, but something in me wouldn't let go. Because that night, when I tried to remember what my husband's voice sounded like, I couldn't. It was gone. That's when I began keeping notes, little reminders on scraps of paper. Call the doctor. Feed the cat. Don't trust Claire. The last one I wrote in big red ink. She started visiting less after that. Sometimes she'd call from her porch instead, her tone too cheerful, too controlled. "Just checking on you, dear." But when she did come inside, I'd find things moved again. My diary gone from the nightstand, a drawer left open, a photo missing. One evening, I decided to test her. I placed a small camera, one my grandson had left behind the lamp. I told her I'd misplaced an old music box my husband gave me, and she helped me look for it. When I stepped out to make tea, I left her alone for 5 minutes. When I checked the footage later that night, my blood turned to ice. She went straight to the living room cabinet, opened the box where I kept my letters, and began taking photos of them with her phone. She even opened a small envelope with my husband's handwriting and whispered, "Got you. Got you." The next morning, I locked my doors, but it was already too late. I didn't sleep that night. The house made noises I'd never noticed before. The tick of the hallway clock stuttered. The refrigerator purred and then hissed, and somewhere in the attic, a nail creaked like a foot on an old stair. I lay awake and replayed every frame of the footage until my eyes throbbed. Her hands were neat, practiced. She knew right where to go, right what to touch. And that whisper got you curled around my ears long after the screen went black. In the morning I boiled water for tea and watched the kettle like a sentry. Steam ribboned up and fogged the window. Across the yard, Claire's curtains were closed. Mid-morning, midday, late afternoon, they stayed closed. When dusk fell, a thin golden slit appeared, and a shadow crossed it, slow and deliberate. The porch light clicked on, then off, once, twice, like a blink. I told myself not to read into it, not to invent hidden messages in ordinary things. But when your mind starts dropping stitches, you learn how to tug at any thread that still feels real. I started with the pills. I lined them up on the kitchen table. The morning tablet for blood pressure, the vitamin D, the occasional sleep aid. Had I taken one last night? I couldn't remember. The little plastic weekly boxes were helpful until they weren't. I'd refill them and later find Wednesday's lid snapped shut when it should have been open. I held the amber bottles under the light, squinting at the labels, my name, my doctor's name, the tiny instructions. On the sleep aid, a white sticker hid the original pharmacy print. I peeled it back with my nail. The text underneath was smudged, but the dosage didn't match. The pill inside looked the same. The words did not. I forced myself to breathe and wrote it down. Sleep aid label swapped. Then I wrote, "Do not take." After lunch, I called the clinic from the kitchen wall phone, the one with the spiral cord that always tangles in itself. The receptionist said my doctor had an opening at 3. I dressed carefully, navy skirt, soft cardigan, the brooch that used to belong to my mother, the piece that looked like a sprig of lilac. For a moment, I hesitated. Hadn't I lost this brooch? Hadn't I turned this drawer upside down for it in August? But there it was, pinned to the felt like it had never moved. I touched the cool metal and felt something undulate in my stomach. Had I put it back? Had someone else? The sky was a thin gray smear as I drove. At a 4-way stop, a truck roared through without pausing, and the wind it pushed rocked my old sedan. For a blink, I saw a different car, a different road. My husband's laugh as he tapped the steering wheel. Then the image slid away, quick as a minnow. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles went pale. The doctor's office was lemon clean and busy. I sat on the rust-colored chair with a clipboard on my knees, and the form might as well have been written in a code. How often do you misplace objects? More than once a day, less than once a day, once a week. Never. How often do you forget appointments? I put my pen down and looked at my hands, spotted, veined, still steady. The nurse led me to the exam room, took my blood pressure, asked if I'd fallen, asked if I felt safe at home. Yes, I said to both, and felt like a liar. When the doctor came in, he was kind in that way that makes worry settle deeper. He asked me to remember 3 words, apple, chair, river, and then distracted me with other questions before asking me to recite them. I got 2. He had me draw a clock with hands pointing to 11:10. I stared at the circle I'd sketched and knew where the hands should go. And still I put one at the 12 and one at the 4. He studied the page and folded his mouth. "These tests can be imperfect," he said gently. "It could be stress. It could be sleep. It could be something else. Let's do some labs. And Margaret, don't take anything not prescribed directly to you. Bring your medications next time." On the way out, I stopped at the pharmacy and, with my voice lower than a whisper, asked the pharmacist to check my prescription history. He tapped and frowned, tapped and nodded. "We filled this once last year," he said, pointing to the sleep aid on his screen. "No refills since. My bottle at home had a fill date from 2 months ago. My skin prickled like I'd walked through nettles. Back in my driveway, I turned off the car and watched my front door. It looked the same as always, blue paint, brass mail slot, wreath of eucalyptus leaves gone dry. My hands trembled only when I fit the key. Inside, the living room smelled faintly like citrus cleaner. I hadn't used citrus cleaner in months. The television remote sat at an exact right angle to the arm of the couch, perfectly centered. I don't center things. I leave them where they fall. I moved through the house slowly, careful not to touch anything, like I had stumbled into a crime scene that just happened to be my own life. In my bedroom, the top drawer of the bureau was slightly open 1/8 of an inch, just enough to see the shadow seam. Inside, my diary lay where I'd hidden it under old scarves. My fingers hovered. I looked for a sign, anything, and then I saw it. A thin piece of white thread taped across the top edge of the last entry, the ends anchored under the paper's grain. If you lifted the page, the thread would snap. The thread was snapped. I sat down on the edge of the bed and felt a great emptiness open inside me, like a cellar door lifting in the floor. I must have made a noise because the cat padded in, tail high, and brushed against my calf. His fur grounded me, reminded me I was still in my body. I opened the diary. The last entry was shorter than I remembered. There had been a paragraph about my daughter's phone call, the way her voice sounded distant and brave, how she promised to visit in December. It was gone. The entry ended with a sentence about the weather and a recipe clipped from the paper. Where my daughter's words should have been, the lines were faintly indented, as if a hand had pressed hard and then lifted without ink. I closed the diary and turned to the window. Claire stood on her porch with a mug in her hand, looking somewhere past me into a place only she could see. When she sensed me, her gaze flicked and landed, full force. I braced myself. She lifted her mug in a small salute, then turned and disappeared into her house. That night, I slid the chain across my door and leaned a chair under the knob. I tucked the camera memory card into the shoebox with the old Christmas ornaments. I put the suspect pill bottle into a Ziploc and sealed it as if I were sealing a wound. The house settled around me. I sat in the dark and listened to my own breaths count time. Near midnight, a soft click came from the back of the house, the sound of the garden gate latch lifting and falling. The cat's ears swiveled. I held my breath and counted to 20. The refrigerator hummed louder, then quieted. I was about to stand when a second sound threaded the silence, the hush of the kitchen window screen sliding in its track. The kettle sat where I had left it. The kitchen table glowed from the small night light by the outlet, and on the table, Arranged in a neat fan as if for display were 7 photographs from my hallway wall, the wedding, the lake house, my daughter with the newborn, my husband in his Navy uniform, my sister and me at the county fair, my parents in front of the lilac bush, and one I had forgotten for years, apparently me at 19, on a swing, hair in a scarf, laughing into the sky. I turned on the light. The cat streaked out of the room. My own face stared back at me from 4 lifetimes. The window over the sink shone black like a mirror. Behind me, the floorboard near the pantry gave a whispering sigh. "Claire," I said, turning. My voice was steady. It surprised me. She stepped from the shadow like she had been conjured from it, her hands open and empty, her expression calm enough to make me doubt the panic I felt. She glanced down at the photos, then up, and smiled a slow, almost sorrowful tilt. "You left your door open," she said. "I was worried." "The chain is on," I answered. "The back door," she said. "You forget sometimes." I thought of the pill label, the pharmacist's screen, the thread across the diary page. "What do you want?" She walked to the table and touched the corner of the photo of my husband, like a parishioner laying a fingertip on a relic. "You," she said, "I want you to remember, properly, not the way you tell it to yourself." I felt the world tilt. What is that supposed to mean? She reached into her pocket and set a small object on the table, the silver locket that had gone missing. My chest squeezed. "You have no right," I said, taking a step forward. Her eyes glistened, and for the first time I saw something other than the honeyed, capable neighbor. I saw hunger, grief, fury held tight like a rope around the ribs. "You gave this to me," she said quietly. "A long time ago. You just don't remember." Heat flushed my cheeks. "I never." She slid the locket closer to me. "Inside is a photograph," she said. "Look." My fingers trembled as I popped the latch. The photograph was so small I had to bring it near the light. A baby, wrapped in a knit blanket. A scrap of paper tucked behind the image with a name written in my handwriting. Not my daughter's name, not my sister's, a name I knew and didn't. It prickled in the back of my mouth like a word from a forgotten prayer. "I used to think," Claire said, her voice suddenly hoarse, "that if I collected enough of your things, I could collect the truth too. That I could pin it down with your recipes and your letters and your little trinkets." She laughed, a sound like a crack running through ice. "Turns out the things were easier to steal than the truth." Her eyes lifted to mine, and I understood for a heartbeat, and then not at all what she had been stealing. Not just objects, the glue between them, the stories. I closed the locket and set it down. "Tell me," I said. "Tell me what you think I've forgotten." She exhaled and took a step back, as if steadying herself on an invisible edge. "I think," she said, "you forgot me." For a moment neither of us moved. Her words hung in the air heavy, impossible, yet spoken with such certainty that my knees softened. I began, but the sound faltered in my throat. She stepped closer, eyes shimmering with something far deeper than malice. "You took care of me when no one else would," she whispered. "You used to sing to me through the walls. You told me stories about lilacs and summer rain. Then one day, you locked that part of your life away. I shook my head. You're mistaken. I didn't have another child, Claire. She smiled, a sad twist. Not a child. A neighbor's child. Mine. The room tilted. The walls pressed closer, and all the air seemed to rush out of my chest. I gripped the table's edge. You're talking nonsense. Her voice was soft but relentless. When I was 9, my mother worked nights. I'd sneak out, cross the fence, and sit on your porch swing. You'd find me and bring me cookies. You told me about your husband being away at sea. You let me call you Aunt Maggie. She swallowed, her hands trembling now. You used to say memory is the only real inheritance a person has. So why, she said, her eyes burning, did you take mine from me? I searched her face lines I'd never studied, eyes too knowing. Somewhere behind them, I glimpsed a child's reflection, all freckles and hunger for love. The memory flickered, fragile as a candle flame in wind, a little girl in the twilight, knees bruised, holding a cracked teacup and crying because her mother had forgotten her birthday. A teacup I glued back together myself. My lips parted. You were that little girl? She nodded slowly. You promised you'd never forget me. Then you moved away, changed numbers, changed everything. When I found you years later here, alone, with your memories fading, I thought maybe it was fate, that I could help you remember, or maybe help myself forget how you left me. My pulse thudded in my ears. You've been stealing from me, Claire. Those photos, my diary. Not stealing, she interrupted, tears spilling freely now. Rescuing. You don't understand your memories are all I have. You kept everything that connected us. When I saw you losing pieces of yourself, I thought if I gathered them, I could keep them safe. For both of us. The kettle clicked as the water inside cooled, and the tiny sound snapped something inside me. You could have asked, I said quietly. Her shoulders slumped. You wouldn't have believed me. You barely remembered me even when I first moved here. You looked right at me and said, "Nice to meet you." Do you know what that does to a person? The truth came at me like waves, each higher than the last. Maybe she had once been that girl. Maybe the years and grief had twisted her need into obsession. Or maybe this was another illusion built on my weakening mind. I didn't know which frightened me more, that she was lying, or that she wasn't. She wiped her eyes and straightened. I'll go. I shouldn't have come in, but Margaret, keep the locket. It belongs to both of us now. She turned and left through the kitchen door, closing it softly behind her. I stood for a long time in the silence that followed. The photos still lay across the table, the baby in the locket staring up at me. I picked it up again and turned the scrap of paper over. Beneath the name was a date, the 15th of June, 1981. My hand trembled. That was the summer I moved towns after my husband's death. That was the summer I stopped answering letters from anyone, even friends. I sank into the chair. My mind kept looping through scenes, neighbors, laughter, a child on a swing, but every time I reached for the girl's face, it blurred. Could she be right? Could I have known her and somehow erased her? The next morning, fog lay thick over the lawns. I watched through the window as Claire's car pulled out of her driveway and vanished down the street. Her curtains stayed open this time, the rooms behind them stripped bare, gone. For 3 days she didn't return. The quiet felt heavier without her shadow nearby. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt a hollow ache, the way silence fills a church after confession. On the 4th night, I found an envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside was a small flash drive and a note written in careful script. "If you want to know the truth, listen." I stared at it for a long time before sliding it into the old laptop my grandson had given me. A single file appeared porch, recording MP3. Her voice came through the speakers, younger, brighter. The 18th of June, 1981. Aunt Maggie baked lemon pies again. She said they taste better when you sing while mixing. She let me record her story today about how she met her husband. The voice crackled, then faded into laughter, my laughter. My voice unmistakably mine, clear and strong. I hadn't heard it like that in years. The recordings continued, short clips spanning months, then years, each one a small window into moments I'd lost. "Don't tell your mother you're here," my voice whispered in one. "She worries." Another, "If you ever feel alone, just remember this house. There's always light here." By the last clip, the tone had changed. "I have to leave, sweetheart." I said softly, "The house is being sold. But one day you'll understand memories can weigh too much if you carry all of them." The file ended with a click. I sat motionless, the laptop screen casting pale light across my face. My heart ached with a sorrow that had no name. I had said those words. I remembered now the girl with hair like autumn wheat, showing up night after night because her mother worked double shifts. I'd promised to keep her safe, and then I'd vanished when grief swallowed me whole. I closed the laptop and whispered into the still air, "I remember you, Claire." Outside, wind rattled the fence. Somewhere, a dog barked, distant and lonely. I thought of the child she'd been, waiting on a porch that never opened again. Maybe this was her revenge, or her reconciliation. Maybe both. That night, I dreamed of lilacs again, of the swing creaking under twilight, of a small voice saying, "Don't forget me." When I woke, dawn was breaking. On my porch sat a small box wrapped in brown paper. Inside were the things she'd taken, the diary pages, the photographs, the silver locket, and a note in that same delicate hand. "I'm giving them back. I'm giving you back to you." I cried, then quiet, long tears that soaked into my palms. But one item lay at the bottom of the box that didn't belong to me. A photograph of a woman, younger, holding a child outside a small brick house. Written on the back were 4 words, "Your neighbor loved you." I didn't know if she meant herself or me. By afternoon, I packed the box away carefully, but I kept the locket. When I opened it one last time, the baby's face seemed less like a mystery and more like forgiveness. I thought I heard a knock at the door, but when I opened it, no one was there, just the sound of the wind through the lilacs and the faint, faraway echo of a child laughing. That night I couldn't rest. The clock ticked unevenly, like it too had started to forget its rhythm. Every sound in the house seemed amplified: the hum of the fridge, the soft scrape of branches against the window, the faint groan of the floorboards as if someone unseen still walked there. I kept the locket clutched in my palm until the metal warmed against my skin. By morning, I decided I needed answers, not from memory, not from the ghosts of the past, but from the paper trail of truth itself. I pulled an old shoebox from the back of my wardrobe, the one with brittle envelopes and photographs I'd promised myself I'd never open again. There were bank slips, house deeds, letters from my husband when he was at sea, and buried underneath, a stack of adoption newsletters, yellowed, folded, addressed to Margaret Reeves. My heart stopped. The first letter read, "Thank you for your interest in temporary guardianship during the 1981 relief program." I blinked, reread, then turned to the next one. Placement confirmed. Claire M. Age 9. To reside with applicant for 3 months while her mother receives treatment. I sank into the chair, air rushing from my lungs. The child had existed, not just as a neighbor's daughter, but as part of my household, part of my life. I hadn't imagined her. I'd simply buried her under layers of grief, so deep even I couldn't dig through them until now. I pressed my hands over my face, trembling. I remembered that summer, the endless heat, the cicadas screaming in the trees, the scent of my husband's old aftershave that lingered long after he was gone. My husband had died that spring in a ship accident. I was shattered, a body walking through motions. When social services asked if I'd care for a child temporarily, I said yes, thinking maybe a child's laughter would keep the walls from swallowing me. Claire, she had big eyes, always watching me, curious about everything. She loved to draw lilacs and seashells, and I had loved her, too. But grief has sharp teeth. The last few weeks of that summer blurred even in my recovered memory. I remembered her mother's name, June Miller. I remembered a fight near the porch, shouting, doors slamming. The memory frayed right after that. What had I done? Why had I sent her away? I needed to know. By noon, I was sitting in the records office downtown. The clerk, a young man with kind eyes, helped me look through the archives. It took nearly an hour before he returned with a faded file. "Here," he said, handing it over gently. "Claire Miller, temporary placement, 1981. I opened it. My name was there in ink. Next to it, in red pen. Removed from care, traumatic event." I swallowed hard and turned the page. The details were sparse, bureaucratic. Guardian reported missing child after altercation. Child found safe next morning. Case closed. Missing. Altercation. The words felt like stones falling into a well. I tried to picture that night, but my mind hit a wall. I remembered lightning, rain, the swing creaking wildly in the storm. I remembered shouting my voice, hers, and then darkness. The clerk tilted his head. "Are you all right, ma'am?" I nodded faintly. "Yes. I just knew her once. When I stepped outside, the air smelled like rain again, the same metallic taste of thunder before a storm. I got in the car and drove, not home but toward the old part of town, where the past still lived in peeling paint and sagging fences. Claire's childhood house was still there, though the brick was cracked and ivy had swallowed most of the walls. A new family lived there now. I didn't knock. I just stood across the street, watching the window where I once saw a lonely little girl staring out at the world. That evening, back home, I placed the documents on the kitchen table. My handwriting looked foreign to me, loops too steady, letters too sure, a younger woman's hand. Then, as if drawn by some invisible string, I took out the flash drive again and checked for hidden files. There was one faint gray, almost invisible. Do not forget MP4. I clicked it. The screen flickered, then showed my own face 20 years younger. I was sitting on the porch swing, the same one from the recordings, and beside me was a small girl, Claire. Her laughter filled the speakers, wild and bright. I smiled at her, holding her hand. Then my younger voice spoke, steady but heavy. If I forget, it's not because I want to, it's because remembering hurts too much. But if you ever find me again, show me this, so I'll know it was real. The video froze on my face. My younger self, eyes wet, mouth trembling, saying a final word that the sound didn't catch. I covered my mouth, choking on a sob that had waited 40 years to escape. I had made that recording for her, for both of us, and she had kept it all this time. When the tears stopped, I noticed movement outside the window. A familiar figure stood by the fence, her coat buttoned, her hair whipping in the wind. Claire. I hurried outside, calling her name. She turned slowly. Her eyes were tired, but her face softened when she saw the flash drive in my hand. I saw it, I said, breathless. I remember everything. For a moment, she said nothing. Then she whispered, I didn't mean to hurt you, Margaret. I just couldn't live thinking I'd been erased. I stepped closer. You weren't erased, sweetheart. I buried you with my pain, and I shouldn't have. She nodded, biting her lip. I thought if I could collect your memories, maybe I could stitch mine back together. We stood in silence as the wind rustled through the lilac bushes. The world around us felt suddenly small, just two women carrying the weight of what they'd lost. Do you forgive me? She asked. My throat ached. Yes, I said, the word trembling. If you can, forgive me too. Her eyes glistened, and for a brief second I saw that same 9-year-old girl, barefoot on my porch, clutching a cracked teacup. She smiled through her tears. I already did. We stood there for a long while, neither speaking. Then she turned toward the road. I'm leaving tomorrow, she said softly. There's nothing left for me here. But thank you for remembering. Where will you go? She shrugged. Anywhere that doesn't smell like ghosts. As she walked away, I felt the years lift off me like dust shaken from an old rug. She didn't look back, but I knew she didn't need to. Some memories, once found, don't need to be chased anymore. That night, I placed the locket back on the mantel, beside my husband's photo. Inside, I added one more thing, a scrap of paper with 2 words written in my shaky hand. Found again. When I went to bed, I dreamed of the swing. Only this time, it didn't creak. It swayed gently under the weight of forgiveness. The next morning began quietly, too quietly, as if the world itself were holding its breath. The rain had stopped but left the earth slick and dark, and a thin mist hung over the street. I stood at my window watching Claire's house, its windows bare, the porch empty, the curtains fluttering faintly from the open back door. She was leaving. But something deep inside me whispered that not everything was over. There was still a piece missing, an unanswered echo inside my head that refused to rest. The traumatic event, the file had mentioned it clawed at me. The night the child went missing, the storm, the shouting, the dark. My mind reached for it like a blind hand searching through fog. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the locket. I opened it again and studied the baby's photograph. I thought it was Claire, but now something didn't fit. The date on the back, the faint smudge of another handwriting layered over mine. It wasn't my writing. It was someone else's. I fetched the letters again from the box. The last one from social services mentioned a case closure due to custody transfer to biological mother June Miller. But then another envelope, one I hadn't noticed before, fell out. It was never opened, postmarked August 1981, a week after the supposed event. My heart pounded as I tore it open. Inside was a short letter written in nervous script. Mrs. Reeves, thank you for everything you've done for Claire. We understand how attached she's grown. But please remember this arrangement was temporary. June is ready to take her home. We know this is difficult. Claire will be leaving tomorrow afternoon. I dropped the letter, feeling the old ache return, sharper than ever. That must have been the day, the storm, the argument, the reason she disappeared. I hadn't lost her. I had been forced to let her go. But something about it still didn't align with the records. Removed after traumatic event. Why use those words? I reached for my diary again, the one she'd stolen pages from. Flipping through, I found one fragment that had escaped her scissors, a torn half-page with a few smeared sentences. Rain all night. June came too early, Claire crying. I told her I couldn't let her go. June screaming. Something broke glass? Claire running. I can't. The ink trailed off there. A blur of blue bleeding into the page's edge. My hands shook as I read it again. I'd tried to stop her from leaving. My grief had made me cling to her like she was the only heartbeat left in the world. And then she'd run. I closed the diary and stared at the window. Somewhere beyond that mist lay the truth that both of us had been running from. I knew I couldn't move on without facing it. By late afternoon, I drove out toward the old park, the one where the swing used to hang. It was nothing but rusted chains now, the seat long gone, but the lilac bushes still grew wild around the fence. I parked near the pond where we used to feed ducks and walked the muddy path until the fog wrapped around me like a shroud. I stopped when I heard a familiar sound, a woman's voice, soft and distant, humming an old tune. My heart stuttered. I turned. There she was, standing under the skeletal tree by the pond, her coat soaked through, her eyes red-rimmed but calm. "You came," she said simply. "I had to," I whispered. "I needed to remember everything." She smiled faintly. Then I guess we're both ghosts of this place. I took a cautious step closer. Tell me what really happened that night, Claire. I need to hear it from you. She sighed, watching a ripple spread across the pond. I remember rain. Thunder so loud it rattled the walls. My mother came for me early, shouting, and you were crying. You said I belonged here. You said she didn't deserve me. I got scared. I ran into the yard. You came after me, slipped on the porch, hit your head on the railing. I touched my forehead unconsciously, as if feeling the echo of that old injury. A scar hid beneath my hairline, a small ridge I'd long forgotten. You lay there for a moment, bleeding. My mother pulled me away, screaming. The next day she told me you'd gone away to the city for treatment. I thought... Her voice cracked. I thought I'd killed you. The wind picked up, tossing her hair. I could taste rain again in the air. The ghost of that storm. You didn't, I said softly. You saved me. She shook her head, tears falling freely now. No, I saved myself, but I left you behind. I grew up thinking I had to forget to survive. And when I found you again, forgetting everything, She broke off, her voice trembling. I thought maybe God was giving me a second chance, to be remembered. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, the years between us dissolving into mist. I wanted to reach out, to touch her face, to prove she was real. Claire, I said gently, I never stopped loving you. I just couldn't bear the pain of losing you. So I buried everything that hurt, including you. She closed her eyes and nodded. I know. I think I did the same. Silence fell again, deep and tender. The pond was still now, the surface reflecting the gray sky above. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. There's one more thing, she said. I found it among my mother's things after she passed. I think it belongs to you. Inside was an old photograph, water-stained but intact. It was me, holding her on the porch that long-ago summer, both of us smiling despite the shadow of grief behind our eyes. On the back, in my handwriting, was a note. To my little girl with the lilac heart, no matter what happens, you will always be home. I traced the words with my fingertip, tears blurring the ink once more. Thank you, I whispered. She stepped closer, and for the first time in 4 decades, I wrapped my arms around her. Her body trembled against mine, warm, solid, alive. We held on for a long time, until the wind softened and the first stars began to appear faintly through the mist. When she finally pulled away, she smiled. Now you remember everything, she said, and I can finally forget. She turned to leave, but I caught her hand. Don't go too far, I said. The lilacs bloom in spring. You should see them again. Her smile deepened. Maybe I will. She walked down the path until she vanished into the twilight, the sound of her footsteps fading like the last notes of an old song. I stayed there long after, watching the pond settle back into silence. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of confusion pressing on my chest. I remembered who I was and who she had been. When I returned home that night, I placed the photograph beside the locket. I whispered to the empty house. She came back. And in that moment I could swear the walls whispered back, "She never really left." The days that followed felt like waking from a long, heavy sleep. The air seemed clearer somehow, as though remembering had scrubbed a film from my eyes. I moved slower, yes, but lighter, like each breath belonged to the woman I used to be, and the one I'd finally become again. Every morning I sat by the window with my tea, watching the street, half expecting to see Claire's car return, but her house stayed empty. A realtor's sign went up on the lawn a week later, for sale. When the wind turned the sign, the metal creaked just like the swing we once shared. It hurt, but in a way that was almost gentle now. I started sorting my things, not to erase, but to remember properly. Each photograph I touched came back sharper, every letter warmer, as though the fog in my head had begun to lift for good. I even baked a pie again, the first since that summer so long ago. The smell of lemon and sugar filled the house, and I laughed quietly to myself. For the first time, the laughter didn't sound hollow, but even in that peace, something still pulled at me. It wasn't fear, it was curiosity. The story was complete, but there was one last mystery I couldn't stop thinking about, the phrase that had haunted me from the start, stealing my memories. Had she really been taking them? Was it all just guilt and grief, or something darker hiding beneath? One evening, as the sun burned down to gold, I found myself looking through the box she'd returned. Tucked between the photographs and diary pages was a small velvet pouch I hadn't noticed before. Inside were 2 USB drives, one I recognized from before, the other unlabeled. I plugged it into the laptop, hesitant, expecting more recordings. But this one was different. It opened to a folder named Project Lilac. I frowned. Inside were audio files, scans of documents, even transcriptions of my phone calls and letters. The earliest dated back nearly 10 years, long before my recent lapses. One of the files caught my eye. Test Report Subject M. Reeves. I clicked it. A man's voice spoke, clinical, detached. Subject appears increasingly dependent on neighbor caregiver Claire Miller. Cognitive data transfer tests continue to show partial memory alignment. Retrieval via sensory trigger successful. Recommend continuation of shared recall sessions. The world spun. I froze. Memory alignment? Data transfer? What were they talking about? I clicked another file, this one marked Session 12. My own voice filled the speaker's calm, unaware. It's strange. Sometimes when Claire tells a story about her childhood, I feel like I lived it. I can see it clearly, her dollhouse, her red bicycle, even her mother's perfume. Then Claire's voice, younger and shaky. That's good, Maggie. Just keep remembering. I need you too. Static crackled, then silence. I slammed the laptop shut, heart racing. My breath came short. What had she done? What had we both agreed to without realizing it? I pulled the flash drive out and stared at it as if it might start explaining itself. The words echoed in my head, memory alignment. I thought of the times she'd urged me to talk about the past, the strange fog that lifted when she was near, the way her stories had started to feel like my own. Had she been recording me, feeding me details from her life until mine blurred into hers? Or worse, had she found a way to implant them? I thought of the small device I'd found months ago behind my coffee pot, the one she called a recorder. Maybe it wasn't recording. Maybe it was transmitting. The realization chilled me to my core. Claire hadn't just wanted my memories, she'd been living through them, using me to rebuild what her own mind had lost. My hands trembled as I set the drive down. A part of me wanted to destroy it, to burn the proof, to pretend I'd never heard that voice. But another part, the part that had lived through grief, guilt, and love, understood something deeper. Claire hadn't done it out of cruelty. She had been desperate to remember the only warmth she'd ever known. And I, lonely, fading, had been desperate to matter. Maybe we had saved each other in a twisted, broken way. That night I wrote her a letter, not to accuse her, not to forgive her, but to finish what we'd started. My dear Claire, if you ever find this, know that I understand. You didn't steal my memories. You carried them when I couldn't. Maybe you thought you were taking pieces of me, but really you were giving me back to myself. Memories are strange things. They're not owned. They're shared. You gave mine a second life. So if you need to take them again someday, you have my permission. With love, always Maggie. I left the letter in the box with the locket and both drives. Weeks passed. My health began to falter. The doctors said it was just time catching up. I didn't fear it. Instead, I began to prepare quietly. I donated most of my things, kept only what mattered: my husband's uniform, a few photos, the diary, and the locket. One morning, near the end of winter, I woke to the faint smell of lilacs, even though none bloomed outside yet. The air shimmered with memory, sunlight on water, laughter on a swing, a little girl running barefoot across the lawn. I smiled. When my neighbor found me later that day, the tea on the table had gone cold beside me. The locket lay open in my hand. Inside, next to the baby's photo, was a new picture, 2 women sitting together on a porch swing, smiling through tears. No one knew how it got there. Months later, when the house was sold and cleaned, the new owners found a package in the attic. Inside were the drives, the letter, and a small note written in unfamiliar handwriting. Her memories live on. I'm taking them home now. C.M. They say the woman who moved into the old brick house down the street never gave her real name. But every spring, when the lilacs bloom, she can be seen sitting on her porch swing, humming softly a tune only an old friend would know. And sometimes, when the wind carries it just right, the house next door seems to hum back. Because maybe memories aren't stolen. Maybe they're simply borrowed, passed from one heart to another, like light through glass, so that even after we're gone, they keep shining somewhere else.